My first comment is the discussion about the referendum, because I hear this story out there, and I really take exception to it. The community passed a referendum allowing us to issue $139 million in general obligation bonds, and we did not include, and deliberately did not include, any language in that referendum referring to new construction or new schools. And we could not use that money for new schools unless we got a second referendum passed. And so what I thought this board did, what I thought I was voting for, was to permit a second referendum to ask the community if we found the money, if we had the money, if we could use that $139 million of general obligation bonds for new schools. I was not aware of a referendum approving a $250 million facilities plan. I believe that the second referendum only asked the community that if we could find the way to use that money for new schools, whether we could use it for new schools, and the community said yes. There's a lot of discussion about the fact that this is a small percentage of a large operating budget. And my perception of that, and I've been around a couple of years now, is that it's a large operating budget, but we don't have a lot of control over most of it, which is why we have very difficult conversations, and had very difficult conversations here 7 months ago, about things that cost less than these percentages of our operating budget. Why we could not get up to 27 buses this year. Why we underfunded our IT refreshment this year. I mean, these are all things that were smaller percentages than the percentages that we're talking about now. And yet, somehow, when we were pushing the administration, buy more buses, the answer always was, where do you want us to get the money? So I find it curious that 7 months ago, sitting in this room, the answer was, where do you expect us to get the money with such a small percentage of our operating budget? But now, the refrain is, it's a very small percentage of the operating budget, and it shouldn't be hard to find. And then the $14 million spread is in my mind, an artificial construct, because we were presented with two alternatives: building 2 new schools or building additions to all the new schools. And if we're going to be facing budget deficits over the next few years, I've got a real question in my mind about whether we should be doing anything, or whether we should go back to the concept that we had back in 2012, which is wait until we can find the money to actually fund these schools without cannibalizing the rest of our budget. And I don't think that's entirely a pipe dream. The state of Illinois is in horrible financial shape right now. They can't agree on an operating budget, but at some point they are going to have to agree on an operating budget. And once they do that, the next pressure point is going to be, there's going to be all sorts of people lobbying for a capital budget. And there is, I think, at least a reasonable shot that there will be a capital budget at some point in the foreseeable future, and that capital budget could include money for schools, money that we could actually use for new schools, where we wouldn't have to use local dollars, or we wouldn't have to cannibalize our budget. I've also pointed out, as another possibility, I get beat up about this, but the countywide facilities sales tax. The projections that we were given current numbers. It would generate $17 million a year for the school district, $13.5 million of which could be used for reducing local property taxes. That leaves another $3.5 million a year that we could use towards facilities, including new schools, if that's what people really want. So my only issue here is I do have concerns about the budget. I do think we're going to end up, more likely than not, being asked to cut things going forward. And I have real concerns about the things that we're going to be asked to cut so that we can pay for these 2 new schools.